Hi, my name is Shatara, and I am the marketing manager at Makers Row. And once a month, we offer our community webinars to help you guys get from idea to retail-ready product and coming up with business, production, quality control best practices. And today we are joined by a very special guest and expert in her field, Syama, and she is the founder of Scaling Retail. So Syama, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So thanks for having me, Shatara. I'm always such a huge fan of what you guys are doing at Makers Row. It is always great to have resources for my clients and also be able to provide these resources for all of your wonderful subscribers and fans. So what I do at Scaling Retail is I run a global consulting firm that works with startup and growth stage businesses internationally. You know, it's been fantastic to see brands that go from idea to production to launch to growth, and then also to be able to work with companies who are launching new revenue streams. So coming out with new products, opening brick and mortar. I got a really cool thing. I'm very close to landing this contract with the UN to do something out in Nepal, which is super cool. So it's really, yeah, it's really, really exciting to be on the forefront of retail and looking at it from not just brick and mortar, but also from e-commerce and how we can combine sales and marketing to achieve those results. So kind of taking a more forward-thinking approach as opposed to the archaic aspects of old school retail, which is, you know, first you do this and then you do that, and you know, it takes you $1 million to launch and you never make it happen.
Yeah. That's awesome to hear all the great things that are happening. Syama's definitely been a contributor to our blog and our community and learning for a very long time. So this is definitely her specialty in teaching in this field. And I wanted to just kind of give you guys a background of why we decided timelines and budgets, because I know for me personally, when we're reaching out to different partners or factory owners, experts to do the next webinar, we found that throughout all of our interviews and our Makers Row Live, that timelines and budgets are the two things that entrepreneurs underestimate and that stop them from continuing in their business. So this is something we definitely wanted to make sure everybody gets as much information about as possible to empower you guys to continue on your journey of entrepreneurship for your product-based business. So I'm gonna let Syama take it away. I'm gonna put my camera off, but what we're gonna do is the first 20 minutes, Syama will just walk us through the timeline, her outline, and a rough outline of that is in the description on the YouTube description. If you guys have any questions throughout the time, be sure to leave your questions in the chat on YouTube and we'll be answering them at the end. So Syama, take it away.
Awesome, perfect. So, okay guys, so when it comes to outlining budgets and really thinking about things like, you know, cash flow and timelines, it can actually be extremely frustrating and difficult to start into this business and already have invested so much money in things like production that you're really unclear about where to go. And so today I really want to focus, obviously 20 minutes is not that much time, but I really want to focus on really the steps and the processes that you need to take in order to be able to quickly go from, you know, idea to launching. So the first thing that I think is really important, obviously, in launching a business is to be able to understand what your price point and your marketing assortment is. And hopefully this is something that you've done in advance of working with your production people. If you've actually gone into samples and if you haven't thought about pricing assortment or, you know, the demographics, et cetera, of what it is that you're creating, then it actually makes it a lot more difficult for you to go through the launching phase. So if you are in just the initial ideas of getting started, the very first step I would do is say, figure out the price point and the demographics that you want your business to be sectioned in. And when you do something like that, or you take that perspective, it really allows you then to build up the rest of your business from that point of view. So as opposed to going, okay, I have this idea and I'm gonna go get samples made and then I'm gonna figure out sales and marketing. I actually think the far more innovative way and strategic way to do this is to say, what is the demographic and price point that I want to be positioning myself at? And then how do I build a product that fills that void, right? That I think is the most important. So number one, understand pricing, assortment planning, demographics, etc. Now, the next aspect of launching is starting to understand your business model and cash flow. Now, it's not a sexy topic for so many people, but for me, it's a sexy topic because I love talking about money and I love talking about how we make money and then how do we spend money really intelligently. So once you understand your market positioning and the kinds of products that you're going to be creating and who you're creating it for, now it's time to start to understand what is the actual cash flow needs for the business. Now, in the initial stages of running your business, most of you guys have probably not allocated enough money when it comes to things like sampling, when it comes to things like really refining the product. I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with who came to the table with their own CAD drawings, their own versions of things, later to find out that they needed to work with a professional to really be able to get this accomplished. Now, allocating budget towards a production consultant is great. Plan to spend anywhere between, let's say, $200 to $300 an hour, sometimes less, sometimes more, but plan to get your hands onto a great production consultant who can actually help educate you in this process of building out your samples. Now, depending on the kind of product that you're creating, the level of detail, etc., you might also be needing to hire a designer, especially if you don't come from a design background. So working with a designer, I think, is extremely valuable, especially if you struggle with things like understanding inseams or understanding how something actually moves, right? How the fabric is going to stretch. You know, all of that goes into production and design. So depending on where your core competencies are, you might either find yourself needing to hire out or take a step back in your timeline to really train yourself on how to be able to pull these things off effectively. Now, aside from just the design side and production management in terms of sample making, there are other few key areas in terms of cash flow that we have to plan for. The first section is going to be all of the fixed costs of running your business. Now, depending on the type of business model you have, whether it's direct to consumer, so that's going with an e-commerce strategy, plus a combination of pop-up shops or other types of market events. I say market events, I mean things like Artists and Fleas, Renegade, Craft Fair, Unique markets, all of those kinds of markets that have really popped up in the last 10 years and have been providing tremendous results for a lot of young brands. So that's the direct-to-consumer route. Now, aside from direct-to-consumer, we're also looking at the wholesale market. And despite, guys, what you're hearing these days from Women's Wear Daily or Business Intelligence or Footwear News, and these other guys that are talking about how it is stores are closing, end of retail, etc. There is not an end of retail. Wholesale is still very much part of the game. Wholesale is definitely something that is not going to go away. So when it comes to thinking about going that direct-to-consumer route, please do not forsake your wholesale counterparts. Wholesale is also an amazing way for you to get your products in front of more distributors, right? More eyeballs, more customers. So think of wholesale as both a marketing strategy in terms of brand value, but also in terms of generating dollars, right? You're in more places, you can see how markets react to your products, and then of course have an e-commerce business as well. So depending on those two models and which you decide to proceed, you're gonna be looking at a few different ways of planning cash flow. Now, of course, for the wholesale market, the sales tools that you need really come in the form of lookbooks, line lists. If you're participating in any trade shows, you'll need to allocate at least $7,000 for things like that. You'd be surprised, right? Doing a trade show can be quite costly. You also need to allocate money for your photo shoot, right? So the photo shoot that you have is also going to be very important. And the reason why it's so important is because that photo shoot is really going to be the lifeline of your brand. So when you think about all the different assets and how people are engaging with your brand, your photo shoot and your branded assets are high. So on average, I'd say allocate at least about $5,000 to $10,000 per photo shoot, right? That's per season, depending on how many collections you're coming out with, depending how often, etc. Now, those sales tools aside, right? So we have lookbooks, we have your line sheets. We also have your photographer assets, which means a model, a makeup artist, a stylist, all those kinds of things. They're extremely important because they actually help to give this illusion of being funded. And when I say funded, I mean looking as if your business is actually in business, right? You're not just using one of those basic or free models or free help. You're actually using quality types of people who are going to be able to produce the results that you're looking for. Now, e-commerce is also going to be pulling from those same assets, right? All those photography, images, all of that stuff that you need. If you just launch e-commerce, you're certainly going to need those as well. You won't obviously be participating in trade shows, but you might have an increased line item in your budget for things like market events, right? Being able to get in front of your customer in a more direct capacity, right? That is, I think, really the wave of retail and where things are headed these days. Without being able to capture your customer 360 degrees, you're going to fall short on achieving any of your big goals, right? And the whole point of launching a business is to reach these goals and to be able to make something exciting and something memorable really happen, right? And be able to achieve some dreams that you have. So part of achieving those dreams lately is really involving both in e-commerce as well as a, in real life kind of on the ground market. Okay, so that's kind of the nuances between wholesale and e-commerce. Cash flow, right? So we're thinking about costs here. Cash flow is also going to be projecting the kind of sales we're going to bring in, right? So it isn't simply just a document full of expenses, but it's also going to be a document that projects what your revenue and what your sales are going to look like. Now, obviously, in the beginning stages of launching, you have no idea what kind of business you're going to be doing, right? You have no idea how you're going to be producing volume. However, it is still important to keep those line items at the top of your cash flow document of your budget. So as you start to build up that budget, right, you can then start to see on an ongoing basis how much money you need to actually cover your costs, right? So again, important to think about budget in terms of revenue and expenses, right? Very interesting, really intimidating. So again, our goal is to kind of break all these things down. Okay, so continue with cash flow. So outside of looking at your sales cost, you also want to take a look at things like your fixed costs that are going to be associated to running your business on a day-to-day basis. So that means things like your cell phone, all of those little tiny details that you cannot live without in order for your business to run. If you need to have certain things in your office, if you need to have fresh water each month that's delivered by Avion or whomever, well, that goes into kind of your fixed office expenses, right? So you want to start to think about what your fixed expenses are and then also your variable expenses. Remember, fixed is going to be everything that your business cannot live without. The things that you will have to pay whether or not your business makes any kind of sale. And from that, in our variable expenses, which I think tends to be the most expansive category, in variable expenses, we start to unpack and understand all the different levers that you have to pull in order to really make that sale or in order to really create that type of brand awareness. So part of your startup costs are going to be including your branding agency, whether that's yourself, a friend, someone else you're going to be paying. You need to have great logos, your colors, your fonts. You're also going to allocate funds and resources for web development and design. Now, on the lower end of things, you can get away with doing a brand package for, let's say, inclusive of copywriting and visual assets. Let's say you can get somewhere around under 10 grand for really strong branding that's still within a reasonable budget. And then when it comes to your website development, you've really got to go with a trusted resource. Otherwise, please plan to spend about $5,000 for building up your website, right? And so I think cost that oftentimes gets overlooked as well. Now, in your startup costs, you also need to be planning for, and I'd say this budget process should last you about, 18 months, right? Of really planning your startup costs that get you to launch, and then planning kind of the launch process go forward, how you're scaling, how you're growing. One oftentimes overlooked element of your budget has to do with operations and logistics. I was recently reminded by an old coworker of mine of how important operations and logistics is. And I have to say that a lot of my current clients have been finding that this is an area that is not very sexy, even let's say less sexy than cash flow, but also equally important. So please make sure that you include, when you're doing your budgeting, what it's going to cost each month for you to have good inventory management systems, right? Are you going to be using something like Deer inventory management system? Are you going to be using something like ShipStation, which is very basic and kind of integrates with all of your Shopify accounts? So start to integrate and look at what are the different models of operations and logistics that you're going to have to invest in order for it to be easy and scalable for you. You're also going to want to make sure you have the right integrations and hookups and APIs with things like, USPS or DHL or FedEx or UPS, whatever your carrier is going to be. Okay, so cash flow. Let's kind of, I know this is very, very short, but let's kind of go through all of the different elements again with cash flow. We have all of your expenses that are related to sales activities. So that means all of the expenses that are related to wholesale, all of the expenses that are going to be related to e-commerce, right? We also have all of your marketing expenses. Now, all of your marketing expenses are going to be digital advertising, whether you're hiring someone on a social media standpoint or you're hiring someone to do paid advertising for you. You need to have a marketing budget. All of your marketing line items need to be directly correlated to an appropriate sales function, right? Because the whole point of doing marketing is, of course, to increase brand value, but you also need to be able to start to measure and monitor how it has a direct correlation to sales, right? Sales are ultimately the key here. So when we start to think about your marketing budgets, and as you start to break down those line items, please be mindful that a PR expense is going to be something that you need to correlate to a sales output. You might not see the direct correlation. Obviously, no PR agency would ever tell you, hire us for $5 grand a month and we'll get you 10 grand a month in returns. But you want to be able to see how that has an impact either through the traffic that gets driven from those press placements or through brand awareness, what kind of impressions that those kinds of activities are getting. So sales, marketing, right? Then we go into budgeting and planning for your cost of goods, and that means understanding both the cost of goods that you're going to be spending for wholesale accounts, but also the cost of goods that you're going to be spending for all of your e-commerce properties, right? So you're going to have to make sure that you separate out what those COGS are, because obviously you're making considerably more margin on e-commerce than you are making for those wholesale accounts. Okay, so now we have sales, marketing, cost of goods, and now we go into the logistics and operations. So we have all of the ship stations, all the kinds of back-end technologies that you're going to need to integrate. And then we move into some more general office expenses. So we have things like your phone, we have things like internet, if you need to make some capital investments into your business, et cetera, meaning a computer or travel, et cetera. All of those things are going to tie back into these general Gen X, right? Not Generation X, but general expenses. So that's kind of the basic breakdown, if you will, of how you're going to start to manage and plan out your cash flow. Certainly, there's probably about 10 more hours of talking I could do about the cash flow section, but that's just to give you a rounded overview. Now, you should not be launching your business unless you're able to really expense and have this overview and be able to spend this kind of capital over the course of about 18 months.
Okay. So I didn't cut you off too early. I didn't cut you off too early, did I?
Oh, well, I mean, I think I probably have. I went over cash flow. I'm pretty sure that I can still go over some timeline stuff.
Okay.
But you tell me.
Okay, yeah, you can definitely do that. I just wanted to make sure for the people that are just joining us that you guys can ask questions in the chat. We're a little bit delayed, so we'll get to them as soon as we see them pop up. But Syama, go ahead and finish, because I think I kind of interrupted you.
No, it's totally fine. It's I feel like it's one of these topics where it's like there's so much to cover. It's very difficult, I think, to know when to stop, but I have certainly learned how to temper my responses. Okay, I'll continue with timeline, and I think timeline is kind of the next most important thing aside from budgets and understanding cash flow. So from a timeline perspective, I think the biggest issue that we run into problems with timeline is things take a lot longer than we anticipate. So that means when we're planning for things like production on samples, et cetera, most people say, oh, can I get this done in 2 months? Can I get this done in 3 months? Well, again, depending on the complexity of what you're doing, you need to really plan for your sample making and production to take about 9 months, right? If not a year. And so I think that's really from the get-go, one of the biggest issues that we have in this industry is that people are not really thinking about all of the work that it takes before you can actually put the button and press the button and say, hey, I'm going live right now. Hey, I'm actually going to spread the word. So there are a couple different key dates here for timelines. Number one is the date that you've decided that you're crazy enough to start a business. And so number one, you want to be able to really give yourself enough padding and enough time to, again, plan out your price points, your demographics, and then start to go through that production and sampling phase, right? Give yourself, if you can, about 9 to 12 months on that. Now, it may be less, it might be more, that really depends on you. Your next milestone, once you have that, is going to be going through your brand building phase. And again, a lot of these things can happen simultaneously. You certainly don't need to be just doing one thing at a time. But if you go through a brand building phase, that's going to be understanding, again, your logo development. It's going to be understanding what your advertising looks like, understanding what your social media strategy is going to look like, all of your logos, your website, etc. So the thing that I find to be the most frustrating is people decide that they just need to get some branding done, which they interpret as like a logo, but really branding goes a step further. Branding means understanding the touch points of your entire consumer funnel. How is someone experiencing your newsletter, right? All of those things. So for branding and website development, et cetera, give yourself a good 6 to 9 months on really thoroughly understanding who the demographic is, translating that with the right copy. So not just visual assets, but also the right copywriting, right? So that's gonna be the next milestone, is doing brand development. Now, the next milestone after that, so let's say you've got your samples, you've got your branding, your website. The next is going to be the development side of all of your outbound facing strategies, right? So that's gonna be things like putting together your photo shoot, which is very important. You're also gonna be putting together your marketing strategy, your sales strategy. And these things, again, can coincide and you can have a lot of overlap, but you cannot put together a sales or a marketing strategy without understanding the product and the price point, and then also all of your branded assets, because these things really hone in on what the brand story is going to look like. Now, when it comes between a marketing strategy and marketing execution, right, the moment that your business is officially live is not the day that your website turns on. It is the day that you're actually able to process orders. So I would say give yourself about a 1 month buffer between when your website goes live and when you can actually take orders in. And if you give yourself this kind of buffer, if you will, it's going to allow you to start to practice sending out orders, meaning have some friends and family soft test it. It's going to allow you to start to do that pitching. So if you're looking for PR, you're going to want that 1 month to buffer, right? You're going to want to get your right PR person on board. You're going to want to be able to get the groundwork going. If it has to do with something like, your own PR outreach, you're going to want about 6 to 8 weeks in advance to really structure and do your own PR outreach if you don't have a background in that. So these are the kinds of things that are important to consider before you actually tell the world that, hey, my business is live and I'm actually going to be able to sell something. So give yourself, as far as like the third milestone, right? It's samples and price point and demographics. It goes into branding. From branding, it goes into strings in order to go live. And then once you go live, guys, you have about 3 months to be able to really consider your brand new, right? After about 3 months, what you're doing isn't that new anymore, right? What you're doing is actually like last season. So you need to also then stay above the timelines in terms of the retail cycles. And so when we think about timelines and retail cycles, it's important to understand, obviously, you're going to be working a season in advance. So most of the time, and I think this is probably one of the most important things and a good thing to kind of end on in terms of timeline, is your timelines are really, really going to have a period of overlap in seasons to get yourself off the ground. The biggest misconception is that you launch with one season, you sell the season, and then you launch the second season, and you sell that season. The problem is that the product development aspect and putting together your campaigns, the photography, all of those other assets need to be done certainly far in advance of going to market. So if I, right now, it's, we're March right now, we're spring, we already are in the middle of spring deliveries, already haven't been dropped, right? They're already in retail stores. The next delivery cycle we're up against, right? We might have a second spring delivery. We might do a high summer delivery. But guys, come August, come July, when you have your high summer delivery, guess what? You're going to be going into market to sell spring of next year. And so understanding that starting a brand or starting a line is not as easy as doing one collection and then testing it. You've really got to be focused on dealing with multiple collections at one point in time. And the sooner that you can get yourself on a consistent production cycle and you can understand the cash flow requirements, the easier it's going to be for you guys to be able to invest the right amount of money. And all in all, when it comes to launching your business, having the right amount of money set aside is either going to be the big determination between launching something that can be consistent and that's going to be able to grow because you've allocated the right kinds of funds, or launching something that's kind of a one-hit wonder that you've never actually given a chance to be able to grow. And so if you don't actually give the business a chance to grow and you don't fuel it with the right kind of funding, then all of the work and energy that you're putting into it in terms of sampling, branding, all of that stuff goes to waste. So my advice to people out there who are launching businesses, who are strapped for cash and who don't have outside or savings, any kind of capital investment, is really take this timeline and this budget and say to yourself, can I really afford to launch this brand and continue the production cycles? How much smaller does the collection need to be? Can you afford to put all of your money into the first collection and then not have anything for the following collections? You certainly cannot, right? It's very, very imperative that you think about the seasonality of the business. And even if you are one of those, avant-garde businesses who are like, I'm just doing one collection a year, I sell separates, or I sell these basic items, amazing, but you still have a retail cadence that you've got to be pitching to. And without having a retail cadence, what happens is your customers and your wholesale buyers fall immensely flat, right? Because they have no idea what to expect from you. They have no idea what you actually need to, what you're going to be selling to them at any given point. So whatever business model you choose, right, whether that's producing 5 times a year, twice a year, once a year, your cadence, meaning how often you're producing collections, has got to be consistent, right? Your ability to meet the market and set the stage has to be consistent. Your funding has to be consistent. And I'm done, Shatara.
I'm just gonna go ahead and jump in. But what's really, so my question though, as I'm listening, is at what stage, because there's a lot of planning that goes into what you just said that's outside of production. So at what stage of the process does someone come to someone like you? Is it like when they're doing their samples? Yeah, tell us.
So I would say, most people come to me in 2 phases. The first is if they don't have an understanding of the market they want to get into, and they have an idea and they're like, how do I take this idea and translate this into something that I can communicate to, let's say, a manufacturer or a production assistant, etc. So I can help them with taking their ideas and then doing the market fit and trying to execute that and take that to production. And then the second stage, and where a lot of people come to me, is after they have samples, and either they've done this pre-work or they come to me with samples and kind of oh shit, what do I do?
Yeah.
And then we kind of go from the sample making process, what they've got, to again kind of finding the right channels and building it out.
Great. So We asked for questions, but obviously since Syama's such an expert, she covered everything, so we have no questions. But if you guys want to know more about Syama, she is the founder of Scaling Retail, and she can help you with everything that she just explained, from marketing, branding, budgeting, timelines, and more. I left her the link to her business in the live chat, so if you guys want to reach out to her. Do you also have like an email, or what's the best way to reach out to you?
I think the best way to reach me is hello@scalingretail.com.
Okay, so if you guys want to talk to her specifically, go ahead and email her and get started on getting your products to your customers the best way possible. So thanks so much, Syama, and we will see you guys next month for our next webinar. Have a good day.
Bye.